Imagine waking up one morning 11,700 years ago and realizing that everything you knew about survival was about to become obsolete. The ice sheets that had covered half the planet for 100,000 years were melting, fast, and with them, the giant creatures your ancestors had hunted for millennia were dying off one by one. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths disappearing like they never existed. Your entire way of life about to vanish. What would you do? Would you adapt or perish? This is the story of how our ancestors didn't just adapt, they completely transformed themselves and the planet in ways that would make them unrecognizable to their own grandparents. This is the story of the Neolithic Revolution, the most dramatic transformation in human history. And it all started with a crisis that forced humanity to make a choice that would echo through every moment of your life today. Picture this, you're a hunter-gatherer in what's now Turkey around 11,500 BC. Your world is changing so fast you can see it with your own eyes. Every year, the landscape looks different. The tundra, where herds of mammoth used to graze, now it's turning into forests, dense, impenetrable forests of birch and pine that make hunting nearly impossible. The megafauna your people have depended on for thousands of years, they're disappearing at an alarming rate, not because you're overhunting them, but because their world is literally melting away beneath their feet. The Laurentide ice sheet that covered most of North America was retreating at a pace of several kilometers per year. In Europe, the Fennoscandian ice sheet was doing the same. This wasn't gradual change. This was catastrophic transformation happening within a single human lifetime. And it created a survival crisis that demanded radical solutions. But here's where the story gets interesting, because in the face of extinction, human beings did something absolutely unprecedented. They didn't just find new animals to hunt or new places to forage. They decided to completely reinvent their relationship with nature itself. They decided to become, in a very real sense, gods. In a region we now call the Levant, modern-day Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Syria, a culture called the Natufians made a decision that seems simple but was actually revolutionary. They stopped moving. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had been nomadic. You follow the food, you survive. You stay in one place, you starve. That was the rule. The Natufians broke that rule. Sites like Ain Malaha and Wadi Hameh 27 reveal something that would have seemed impossible to earlier humans. Permanent stone houses, not temporary shelters, but actual buildings with plastered floors and storage facilities. Think about what that means, storage facilities. You're not just eating what you find today, you're planning for tomorrow, next week, next month. That requires a completely different mindset. But then something terrifying happened. Around 10 to 800 BC, the climate did something that must have felt like the gods were punishing humanity for their hubris. A period called the Younger Dryas plunged the northern hemisphere back into near-glacial conditions. Just when people were starting to settle down and figure out this new lifestyle, winter came back with a vengeance. Archaeological evidence from sites across the eastern Mediterranean shows what happened next. Population collapse, site abandonment, people fleeing their permanent homes and going back to the old ways. The experiment seemed to have failed catastrophically. But here's the twist, some communities didn't give up. At sites like Tel Abu Huraira in Syria, we see something remarkable. Instead of abandoning their settlements, these communities doubled down on intensification. They started processing foods that their ancestors would have considered barely edible. Small seeds, nuts, tubers, things that required hours and hours of grinding and processing to make digestible. They developed specialized grinding stones and roasting pits. They made their tools more efficient, more standardized. They were working harder than any humans had ever worked before, but they were surviving, and they were learning lessons that would change everything. Then, around 11,700 BC, the Younger Dryas ended as suddenly as it had begun. The Holocene epoch began, and this time conditions were perfect. Not just good, perfect. Temperatures rose, rainfall increased, and across the Fertile Crescent, wild wheat and barley started growing in dense stands that were almost agricultural already. Nature was offering humanity a gift. But accepting that gift required knowledge that had been painfully earned during the Younger Dryas crisis. This is where we need to talk about a place that completely rewrites what we thought we knew about early civilization. A place that shouldn't exist, a place so advanced for its time that when it was first discovered, archaeologists literally didn't know what to do with it. I'm talking about Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe, located in southeastern Turkey, dates to approximately 9,500 BC. Let that sink in for a moment. 9,500 BC, that's 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the Egyptian pyramids, 6,500 years before writing was invented. And yet this site contains massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 16 tons, carved with sophisticated reliefs of wild animals, snakes, scorpions, wild boar, aurochs, and birds of prey. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. There's no evidence of agriculture at Göbekli Tepe. No domestic plants, no domestic animals. The people who built this were still hunter-gatherers, or were they? Because how do hunter-gatherers, who supposedly live hand-to-mouth, organize the labor to quarry, transport, and erect stones weighing 16 tons? How do they develop the social organization necessary to coordinate teams of 20 to 30 people working for months on end? The answer is that everything we thought we knew about the relationship between agriculture and civilization was backwards. We always assumed that agriculture came first, created surplus, surplus enabled specialization, and specialization led to complex society and monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe proves that the causation might run in the opposite direction. Maybe it was the need to build these monuments, to gather for these massive ritual feasts that drove people to figure out how to produce food more intensively. The iconography at Göbekli Tepe tells us something profound about the people who built it. The T-shaped pillars likely represent stylized human figures. You can see carved arms and hands on some of them. The animal reliefs follow specific compositional rules, with predators often positioned above prey species. There are three-dimensional sculptures of wild boars and lions that demonstrate sophisticated artistic abilities. And then there are these abstract symbols, crescents, circles, H-shapes, that suggest the development of symbolic communication systems that might be precursors to writing. But Göbekli Tepe wasn't alone. About 70 kilometers away at a site called Jericho, something equally remarkable was happening. Pre-pottery Neolithic Jericho features a massive stone tower standing 8.5 meters high with an internal staircase of 22 stone steps. Each stone block weighs several hundred kilograms. The tower is connected to a defensive wall extending around the settlement's perimeter, approximately 4 meters high, with bastions and gates. Now here's the question that keeps archaeologists up at night. Who were they defending against? Other human groups? But why would you need such massive fortifications unless you had something extremely valuable to protect? And what could be so valuable in 8000 BC that you'd invest this kind of labor in defending it? The answer points to something we haven't talked about yet. Jericho sits next to a massive freshwater spring. In an increasingly arid landscape, water was becoming the most valuable commodity on Earth. But let's talk about what's really happening here. These communities weren't just building impressive structures, they were fundamentally transforming their toolkit, their technology, their entire way of interacting with the physical world. Ground stone tools, which require completely different manufacturing techniques than flaked stone tools, became increasingly important. Stone axes and adzes shaped through pecking and grinding provided more durable cutting edges for woodworking. These tools enabled the construction of substantial timber structures and the clearing of forest areas for cultivation. Think about what that means. For the first time in human history, people weren't just adapting to their environment, they were actively reshaping it. They were cutting down forests, they were redirecting water, they were selecting which plants would grow and which wouldn't. They were becoming, quite literally, the primary evolutionary force shaping life in their regions. Harvesting implements underwent radical evolution. Sickle blades hafted in wooden or bone handles allowed efficient cutting of grain stems. Microscopic analysis reveals that many blades show use-wear patterns consistent with cutting silica-rich plant stems. The standardization of blade forms suggests specialized production by skilled craftspeople who were no longer spending their days hunting or gathering. They were making tools, full-time. But it's the grinding technology that really tells the story of how hard people were working. Large basalt grinding stones, sometimes weighing over 100 kilograms, were carefully shaped to provide optimal surfaces for crushing seeds and grains. Smaller handstones, ergonomically designed for extended use, show wear patterns indicating hours of daily grinding activity. Some sites contain dozens of these implements, suggesting communal food processing activities. This was backbreaking labor on a scale that no previous humans had ever experienced. Storage technologies developed alongside processing innovations. Large, stone-lined pits plastered with lime mortar provided secure storage for processed grains. At sites like Netiv Hagdud in the Jordan Valley, archaeologists have identified storage facilities capable of holding several tons of plant materials. Let me repeat that, several tons. These installations represent massive investments in infrastructure and demonstrate planning horizons extending months, even years, into the future. This is something fundamentally new in human psychology. Hunter-gatherers live largely in the present. You find food, you eat it, maybe you store a little for a few days. But farmers? Farmers live in the future. Every action you take in March determines whether you eat in November. That requires a completely different way of thinking about time, about causation, about the relationship between present actions and future consequences. The transition from mobile to sedentary lifestyles created opportunities that would have been impossible for nomadic groups. Sedentary communities could maintain heavier toolkits and invest in specialized implements. Workshop areas at sites like Muribet in Syria contain evidence of intensive stone tool production, specialized cores, debitage, finished implements. And here's something crucial, the presence of exotic raw materials. Obsidian from Anatolia, hundreds of kilometers away. Flint from distant sources. This indicates expanding trade networks, which means expanding social networks, which means increasing social complexity. Bone and antler working advanced significantly during this period. Bone needles, some less than 2 millimeters in diameter, demonstrate remarkable craftsmanship and suggest the production of fine textiles or leather goods. Think about the skill required to create a needle that small using stone tools. Think about the patience, the fine motor control, the hours and hours of practice necessary to develop that capability. But all of this, the monuments, the storage, the specialized tools, required something that had never existed before in human societies, the ability to coordinate large-scale labor projects. The evidence from these early Neolithic sites reveals communities undergoing rapid social transformation. The feasting remains at Göbekli Tepe, thousands of animal bones from communal meals, suggest that ritual gatherings played crucial roles in maintaining social cohesion and coordinating group activities. Settlement patterns show increasing investment in permanent installations. Houses at sites like Jerf el Ahmar in Syria feature substantial stone foundations, plastered floors, and built-in storage facilities. Some structures contain elaborate decorative elements, painted plaster, carved stone reliefs, carefully arranged animal skulls, indicating the development of household-based ritual practices. This is the beginning of something that would become central to all subsequent human civilization. The concept of the house as not just shelter, but as a sacred space, a center of identity and ritual. The archaeological record from this transitional period, roughly 10,000 to 9500 BC, demonstrates humanity's remarkable adaptability. These communities hadn't yet domesticated plants or animals in the strict sense, but they had developed many of the social and technological prerequisites for agricultural life. They had figured out how to live in one place year-round. They had developed storage technologies. They had created social mechanisms for coordinating large groups. They had transformed their toolkits and their landscapes. And then between 9500 and 8000 BC, they took the final step. They began the process of actually domesticating plants and animals, fundamentally and irreversibly altering the genetic makeup of other species to suit human needs. And this wasn't just a technological innovation. It was an act of creation that would make humans the most powerful evolutionary force on the planet. Let's talk about the founder crops, 8 species that provided the nutritional and economic foundation for the world's first agricultural societies. Emmer wheat and inkhorn wheat were the most significant cereals. Wild emmer grew naturally in dense stands across the upland regions of the southern Levant, southeastern Turkey, and northern Syria. The plant's large seeds, containing approximately 12 to 15% protein and substantial carbohydrate reserves, made it an attractive target. But here's the fascinating part. Domestication wasn't a simple process of we decided to plant these instead of gathering them wild. It was a co-evolutionary process that changed both the plants and the people. The most significant transformation involved the rachis, the stem segment connecting seeds to the plant. Wild wheat possessed a brittle rachis that shattered upon ripening, dispersing seeds naturally. Domestic varieties developed a tough rachis that retained seeds on the plant. Think about what that means. Domestic wheat can't reproduce without human intervention. We created a plant that literally cannot survive in the wild. We made it dependent on us for its very existence. At the same time, we became dependent on it for our survival. This wasn't humans domesticating wheat. This was humans and wheat domesticating each other. A true symbiosis that has persisted for 10,000 years and now covers millions of square kilometers of the planet's surface. Barley underwent similar transformations. 2-row barley appeared first, followed by 6-row varieties. The domestication syndrome included not only non-shattering rachis, but also synchronized ripening. Wild barley seeds matured at different times to maximize dispersal opportunities. Domestic varieties ripened simultaneously to facilitate efficient harvesting. Again, we're seeing plants being reshaped to suit human harvesting schedules rather than their own reproductive strategies. The legume component of the founder crops package, lentils, peas, chickpeas, and bitter vetch, provided essential amino acids lacking in cereal grains, creating nutritionally complete protein profiles when consumed together. This is crucial. Cereals alone can keep you alive, but they won't keep you healthy over multiple generations. You need the protein diversity that legumes provide. The people who figured this out, through trial and error, through careful observation, had discovered nutritional science without laboratories or chemical analysis. Lentils grew abundantly in oak pistachio woodlands throughout the Fertile Crescent. Domestication involved selecting for larger seeds with thinner coats that absorbed water more readily during cooking. Archaeological lentils from Abu Huraira show clear size increases beginning around 9000 BC, with domestic varieties containing seeds nearly twice the diameter of their wild ancestors. That's not accidental selection, that's systematic breeding over hundreds of generations. Bitter vetch presented unique challenges due to its toxic compounds, neurotoxic amino acids that could cause paralysis if consumed in large quantities. But early farmers developed sophisticated detoxification techniques, involving soaking, boiling, and fermentation. They took a poisonous plant and made it edible through pure ingenuity and experimentation. How many people got sick or died figuring that out? We'll never know. But their sacrifice gave their descendants a reliable protein source that could grow in marginal soils where other crops failed. Flax completed the founder crops package, providing both nutritional and technological resources. Wild flax produced small, oily seeds rich in omega-3 fatty acids, while its fibrous stems could be processed into textiles. The domestication process involved selecting for larger seeds and longer, stronger stem fibers. The appearance of specialized tools, flax combs, spindle wells, loom weights, marks the integration of flax cultivation into early agricultural systems. But domestication wasn't happening in just one place. This is crucial to understand. Agriculture wasn't invented once and then spread everywhere. It was independently invented multiple times in multiple places by multiple peoples who had no contact with each other. In the Yangtze River Valley of China, communities began cultivating wild rice around 9000 BC. In Mesoamerica, squash domestication began around 8000 BC. In the Andes, potato cultivation started around 6000 BC. In sub-Saharan Africa, sorghum and yams. In New Guinea, taro and bananas. This tells us something profound. The transition to agriculture wasn't a lucky accident that happened once. It was a predictable response to specific environmental and demographic pressures. When populations grew large enough that wild resources became scarce, and when climate conditions created opportunities for intensive plant management, humans independently figured out agriculture, again and again and again. Chinese rice cultivation developed in wetland environments quite different from the semi-arid conditions of fertile crescent agriculture. Wild rice grew naturally in shallow lakes, marshes, and river margins. Communities had to develop specialized techniques for managing water levels and creating artificial wetlands. Archaeological evidence from Hemudu shows sophisticated water management systems, dikes, channels, controlled flooding mechanisms. These weren't simple farmers, they were hydraulic engineers reshaping entire watersheds to create optimal conditions for rice cultivation. In Mesoamerica, squash domestication occurred within a different ecological context. The plant grew as part of a polyculture system that would eventually include maize and beans, the famous Three Sisters combination. This system wasn't just agriculturally sophisticated, it was ecologically brilliant. Corn provides structure for beans to climb. Beans fix nitrogen in the soil that corn depletes. Squash leaves shade the ground, retaining moisture and preventing weed growth. Three plants working together as a system, creating yields far greater than any could produce alone. The shift toward agricultural production catalyzed fundamental changes in settlement patterns. Seasonal camps gave way to permanent villages anchored by agricultural fields and storage facilities. At Tel Es-Sorwan in Iraq, excavations revealed a planned village layout with rectangular houses arranged along streets, surrounded by defensive walls and irrigation channels. This is urban planning. This is architecture as a system rather than individual buildings. This is the beginning of cities. The architecture of early agricultural villages reflected both practical needs and emerging social distinctions. Houses at sites like Jarmo featured substantial stone foundations supporting mud brick walls. Mud brick technology represented a significant innovation. You could create durable structures using locally available materials. No need for forests to provide timber. No need for mountains to provide stone, just dirt, water, and sun. It was democratizing architecture, making substantial buildings accessible to communities that didn't have access to premium building materials. Interior spaces showed increasing specialization. Storage rooms with large ceramic vessels, grinding areas with built-in installations, cooking areas with specialized ovens, workshop spaces for tool production, textile manufacturing, craft activities. Houses were no longer just shelters, they were becoming economic units, production centers, the physical manifestation of increasingly complex household economies. The demographic implications were profound. Reliable food production supported larger populations than hunting and gathering ever could. Archaeological evidence shows settlements growing from hamlets of 20-50 people to villages supporting several hundred residents. But population growth created new challenges. How do you resolve disputes in a community of 500 people versus one of 50? How do you coordinate collective activities? How do you manage shared resources? Archaeological evidence suggests the emergence of social hierarchies. Some individuals gained access to superior housing, exotic goods, specialized tools. Burial practices became more elaborate, with some graves containing multiple individuals, valuable grave goods, evidence of complex mortuary rituals. This is inequality emerging, not necessarily because some people were evil or greedy, but because agricultural societies created new opportunities for some individuals to accumulate and control resources in ways that weren't possible for hunter-gatherers. The increased population density facilitated technological innovation. Larger communities could support craft specialists who developed sophisticated techniques for pottery production, metallurgy, textile manufacturing. The concentration of skilled artisans accelerated technological development. Archaeological assemblages from early agricultural sites show increasing standardization of tool forms and manufacturing techniques, suggesting the development of specialized production systems and possibly apprenticeship systems for training new craftspeople. Agricultural communities developed new forms of social organization to manage collective resources. Planting, harvesting, food processing required synchronized group labor that exceeded the capabilities of individual households. Archaeological evidence suggests the emergence of community leaders who organized collective work parties, managed food distribution during shortages, coordinated defense against external threats. The construction of communal facilities, large storage buildings, ceremonial structures, defensive works, demonstrates the ability to mobilize substantial labor forces for collective projects. But agriculture also created new relationships between humans and their environment. Agricultural fields required long-term investments in soil improvement, water management, pest control that tied communities to particular locations. The development of permanent settlements created anthropogenic landscapes where human activities fundamentally altered local ecosystems. Archaeological pollen records from early agricultural sites show dramatic changes in vegetation patterns, natural forest communities replaced by agricultural fields, and managed grazing areas. Transformation of human-animal relationships during this period represented a parallel revolution to plant domestication. While communities were developing agricultural systems, they simultaneously began bringing wild animals under human control. But animal domestication followed a markedly different timeline than plant cultivation. Dogs were first, domesticated approximately 15,000 years ago during the late Paleolithic, making them significantly older than any agricultural development. The Bonn-Oberkassel site in Germany yielded remains of a dog buried alongside humans around 14,200 years ago, displaying clear morphological distinctions from contemporary wolf populations. The skull shows reduced tooth size, shortened snout length, modified cranial proportions, characteristic of domestic dogs. But here's what's fascinating. Genetic analysis reveals a complex domestication process involving multiple wolf populations across different geographical regions. Mitochondrial DNA suggests East Asian wolves contributed significantly to early dog lineages, while nuclear DNA indicates substantial genetic input from European wolves. The behavioral modifications accompanying dog domestication were as significant as the physical changes. Dogs integrated into human burial practices. At Ain Malaha, a human burial dated 12,000 years ago includes a puppy positioned with its paw resting on the deceased person's chest. This isn't just a working animal, this is a companion, an emotional bond, a relationship that transcends pure utility. Dogs had achieved special status within human communities, becoming part of the family in ways that no other animal ever would. The transition from dog domestication to controlling ungulate species represented a qualitatively different challenge. You're trying to manage large, potentially dangerous animals with complex social behaviors. Sheep domestication began around 9000 BC in the Zagros Mountains of Iran and eastern Anatolia. Wild mouflons provided the ancestral stock. These animals lived in small herds inhabiting rocky, mountainous terrain, where their agility provided protection from predators. They possessed characteristics that made them suitable for domestication: relatively small size, herbivorous diet, social organization based on dominance hierarchies, behavioral flexibility. But their natural wariness and tendency to flee when threatened required early herders to develop sophisticated animal handling techniques. The morphological changes accompanying sheep domestication were gradual but distinctive. Wild mouflons possessed short, coarse hair and seasonal coat changes. Domestic sheep developed longer, finer wool that could be harvested annually without harming the animal. This is another example of coevolution: humans selecting for wool production, sheep becoming dependent on humans for shearing, creating a mutual dependency that would persist for millennia. Goat domestication occurred simultaneously with sheep management, utilizing wild bezoar goats from similar mountainous regions. The Ganj Dareh site in Iran provides compelling evidence for early goat management around 8500 BC, with faunal assemblages dominated by young male goats, a pattern suggesting selective culling to maintain optimal herd composition. Wild bezoar goats were naturally more aggressive and independent than mouflon sheep, requiring different management strategies and presenting greater challenges for human handlers. Cattle domestication represented perhaps the most significant challenge faced by early pastoralists. Given the size, strength, and aggressive potential of wild aurochs, these massive animals stood up to 1.8 meters at the shoulder and weighed over 1,000 kilograms, possessed formidable horns and territorial behaviors that made them extremely dangerous to approach. How do you even begin to domesticate something that can kill you with a single charge? How do you gradually, over generations, transform a wild auroch into a docile dairy cow? The earliest evidence for cattle management appears around 8500 BC at sites in central Anatolia and the northern Levant. Çatalhöyük in Turkey contains extensive evidence for cattle utilization: wall paintings depicting humans interacting with large bovines, faunal assemblages showing systematic butchering patterns. The site's inhabitants appear to have developed specialized techniques for capturing and controlling aurochs, possibly involving the construction of large corrals and the use of trained dogs to assist in herding operations. The domestication process for cattle involved selecting for reduced aggression, increased docility, modified physical characteristics including smaller body size and altered horn configurations. Archaeological cattle remains from sites like Shah Hagalan in Israel show progressive morphological changes between 8000 and 7500 BC, with domestic varieties displaying shortened skulls, reduced tooth size, modified limb proportions. These changes occurred gradually over many generations, requiring sustained breeding programs and careful selection of reproductive animals. Pig domestication followed a different trajectory, utilizing wild boar populations that lived in forested environments rather than open grasslands. Wild boar were omnivorous, intelligent, highly adaptable animals with complex social structures based on matriarchal groups. Their natural behaviors included rooting for underground foods, wallowing in mud, defending territories through aggressive confrontations. Characteristics made them both valuable as domestic animals and challenging to control. The integration of domestic animals into human communities required fundamental changes in settlement organization and resource management strategies. Unlike plant cultivation, which could be managed through seasonal activities, animal husbandry demanded year-round attention and substantial investments in infrastructure. Archaeological sites from this period show evidence of specialized animal housing, stone-built pens, shelters, feeding areas designed to accommodate different species requirements. At Tel Ramad in Syria, excavations revealed complex arrangements of stone-walled enclosures associated with residential areas, suggesting that animals were kept in close proximity to human habitations. These facilities included drainage systems to manage animal waste, storage areas for fodder, water management systems to provide reliable drinking sources. The construction of such infrastructure represented significant labor investments and demonstrated long-term commitments to animal husbandry. The development of pastoral nomadism emerged as communities recognized the potential for exploiting marginal environments unsuitable for agriculture through mobile animal husbandry. The steppes of Central Asia, the highlands of Iran and Anatolia, the semi-arid regions of the Levant provided extensive grasslands that could support large herds of sheep, goats, and cattle. Archaeological evidence from sites like Tepe Sarab in Iran shows seasonal occupation patterns consistent with pastoral mobility, with communities moving their animals between summer and winter grazing areas. Pastoral societies developed sophisticated knowledge of animal behavior, grassland ecology, seasonal movement patterns. They understood the nutritional requirements of different species, the carrying capacity of various environments, the optimal timing for breeding, birthing, and weaning activities. This knowledge was transmitted through oral traditions and practical training, creating specialized pastoral cultures with distinct identities and social organizations that would persist into the modern era. The genetic changes accompanying animal domestication were as significant as the morphological modifications visible in archaeological remains. Domestic animals developed altered stress responses, modified reproductive cycles, changed behavioral patterns that made them more suitable for human management. These changes often involved the retention of juvenile characteristics into adulthood, a phenomenon known as neoteny, which made adult animals more tractable and responsive to human direction. Sheep domestication involved significant modifications to wool production, with domestic varieties developing continuous wool growth rather than the seasonal hair changes characteristic of wild mouflon. This change required human intervention for shearing, making the animals dependent upon their human partners for comfort and health. Archaeological evidence from sites like Tel Ramad includes specialized tools for wool processing, combs, spindles, weaving equipment that demonstrate the integration of wool production into textile manufacturing systems. Cattle domestication produced animals with modified lactation patterns, allowing for milk production beyond the natural weaning period of calves. This development created opportunities for dairy production, providing communities with renewable protein sources that didn't require killing animals. Archaeological evidence for early dairy production includes specialized pottery vessels with perforated bottoms used for cheese making and lipid residue analysis, showing milk fats in ceramic containers from sites like Çatalhöyük. The coevolution of humans and domestic animals created mutual dependencies that fundamentally altered both species' evolutionary trajectories. Humans developed lactose tolerance in adult populations that relied heavily on dairy products, while domestic animals evolved increased dependence on human care and protection. This relationship created stable partnerships that could persist across generations and geographic regions, fundamentally reshaping the ecology of entire continents. Regional variations in domestication practices reflected local environmental conditions, available wild species, cultural preferences. In the Andes Mountains of South America, indigenous communities began domesticating llamas and alpacas around 6000 BC, utilizing these camelids for transportation, fiber production, meat. The high-altitude environment of the Andes presented unique challenges for animal husbandry, extreme temperature variations, low oxygen levels, limited vegetation diversity. Llama and alpaca domestication involved selecting wild vicuñas and guanacos for increased size, modified fiber characteristics, enhanced load-bearing capabilities. In Southeast Asia, communities developed water buffalo domestication around 7000 BC, utilizing these large bovines for rice cultivation in wetland environments. Wild water buffalo inhabited marshy areas and river valleys, possessing behaviors and physical adaptations suited to aquatic environments. Their large size, strength, comfort in wet conditions made them ideal for plowing flooded rice fields and other agricultural tasks requiring substantial power. The integration of water buffalo into rice cultivation systems created highly productive agricultural complexes that could support dense human populations. These regional variations in animal domestication demonstrate the adaptive flexibility of human communities in utilizing available biological resources. Each domestication event required detailed understanding of local species behaviors, ecological requirements, potential utility for human societies. The success of these efforts depended upon sustained breeding programs, sophisticated animal handling techniques, the development of supporting infrastructure, and social institutions. The sophisticated animal husbandry systems that had emerged across multiple regions by 7000 BC created new demands for technological innovation that would fundamentally transform human material culture. As communities developed increasingly complex relationships with domestic animals and refined agricultural practices, they required new tools, storage systems, processing techniques to manage their expanding resource base effectively. This period witnessed revolutionary developments in pottery production, textile manufacturing, early metallurgy, craft specialization that would establish technological foundations persisting for millennia. The revolution in ceramic technology during this millennium represented one of humanity's most significant material innovations. Though pottery production had appeared much earlier in East Asia around 20,000 BC among hunter-gatherer societies of the Jomon culture in Japan, these early Japanese ceramics, characterized by cord-marked surfaces and elaborate decorative schemes, served primarily ritualistic and seasonal food processing functions rather than the storage-oriented purposes that would drive pottery development in agricultural societies. The ceramic revolution of the 7th millennium BC in agricultural societies of the Near East and Europe involved fundamentally different technological approaches and functional requirements. Communities like those at Jarmo in Iraq and Çatalhöyük in Turkey developed pottery production systems specifically designed to meet the storage, cooking, processing needs of sedentary agricultural societies managing substantial food surpluses. The technical challenges of pottery production demanded sophisticated understanding of clay mineralogy, temper selection, firing chemistry. Early potters learned to identify suitable clay deposits, typically found in river valleys and lake margins, where fine-grained sediments accumulated over geological time periods. These clays required careful preparation involving weathering, crushing, mixing with organic or mineral tempers to prevent cracking during drying and firing. Archaeological analysis of ceramic sherds from sites like Tel Es Sarwan reveals the use of various tempering materials including chopped straw, sand, crushed shell, ground pottery, sherds from previous firings. Construction techniques employed by early potters varied considerably across different regions and cultural traditions. Coil building methods involving the spiral construction of vessel walls using clay ropes provided structural strength and allowed for the creation of large storage containers capable of holding hundreds of liters of grain or liquid. Slab construction techniques using flattened clay sheets joined at edges enabled the production of rectangular vessels and specialized forms. Hand modeling approaches allowed for the creation of smaller vessels with complex shapes and decorative elements. Firing technology represented perhaps the most critical aspect of ceramic production, requiring precise control of temperature, atmosphere, timing to achieve durable, functional vessels. Early potters developed open firing techniques using wood, dung, or straw as fuel sources, carefully arranging vessels in shallow pits or on surface fires to ensure even heat distribution. These fires typically reached temperatures between 600 and 800 degrees Celsius, sufficient to drive off remaining moisture and initiate the chemical changes that transformed clay into ceramic material. The development of more sophisticated firing techniques included the construction of simple kilns using stone or clay walls to contain heat and control airflow. Archaeological excavations at Dabaghiya in Iraq have revealed kiln structures dating to approximately 6,500 BC, featuring fire chambers connected to firing areas through draft channels that improved temperature control and fuel efficiency. These installations allowed potters to achieve higher temperatures and more consistent results while reducing fuel consumption and firing time. Surface treatments and decorative techniques demonstrated the artistic sophistication of early ceramic traditions while serving functional purposes related to vessel performance and cultural identity. Burnishing techniques involving the rubbing of leather-hard clay surfaces with smooth stones or bone tools created dense, water-resistant surfaces ideal for liquid storage. Slip application using fine clay suspensions colored with mineral pigments provided decorative effects while improving vessel durability and reducing porosity. Painted decoration became increasingly elaborate during this period, with potters developing sophisticated pigment preparation techniques using iron oxides, manganese compounds, organic materials to create red, black, brown, cream-colored paints. The Hassuna culture of northern Mesopotamia produced ceramics with intricate geometric patterns applied using brushes made from animal hair or plant fibers. These decorative schemes often carried symbolic meanings related to community identity, ritual practices, seasonal cycles, creating visual languages that communicated cultural information across generations. Functional applications of pottery extended far beyond simple storage and cooking vessels to include specialized forms designed for specific technological processes. Large storage jars, some exceeding 2 meters in height and capable of containing over 1,000 liters, provided secure grain storage that protected agricultural surpluses from rodents, insects, moisture. These vessels featured narrow necks that could be sealed with clay stoppers or organic covers, while their pointed bases allowed for easy insertion into storage pits or support structures. Cooking vessels developed distinctive forms optimized for different food preparation techniques. Round-bottomed pots with wide mouths facilitated stirring and served effectively for boiling grains and stews, while flat-bottomed pans provided optimal heat distribution for bread baking and meat roasting. Specialized brewing vessels identified through residue analysis, showing evidence of fermented beverages, featured internal strainers and pouring spouts designed for beer or wine production. The Jiahu site in China has yielded pottery vessels containing chemical residues of fermented rice, honey, fruit beverages, dating to approximately 7,000 BC. Ritual and ceremonial ceramics represented another important category of pottery production, with communities creating specialized vessels for religious practices, burial customs, community gatherings. These objects often displayed exceptional craftsmanship and decorative elaboration, suggesting production by skilled specialists rather than household potters. The figurines and ritual vessels from Çatalhöyük include elaborate goddess figures, animal representations, ceremonial containers decorated with complex symbolic motifs that provide insights into early religious and social practices. The advancement of textile production during this period paralleled ceramic innovations in complexity and technological sophistication. While the basic principles of fiber processing and thread production had been established during earlier periods, the 7th millennium BC witnessed revolutionary developments in loom weaving, felt production, the systematic processing of both plant and animal fibers. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe and Asia demonstrates the emergence of specialized textile production centers where skilled craftspeople developed increasingly sophisticated techniques for creating complex fabrics. Loom weaving technology underwent fundamental innovations that dramatically expanded the range of possible textile products. The development of the vertical warp-weighted loom, evidenced by numerous clay loom weights found at sites like Sesklo in Greece, allowed weavers to create large, complex textiles with consistent thread tension and intricate pattern work. These looms featured vertical wooden frames supporting warp threads held taut by carefully calibrated clay weights, while horizontal weft threads were inserted using wooden shuttles and beaten into place with bone or wooden beaters. The loom weights themselves demonstrate remarkable standardization and technical sophistication, with examples from individual sites showing consistent weights and forms that indicate systematic production methods. Analysis of loom weights from Çatalhöyük reveals that weavers used different weight categories for different thread types, with heavier weights employed for coarse wool threads and lighter weights used for fine linen fibers. The positioning and spacing of weights on archaeological looms suggest that early weavers understood complex relationships between thread tension, fabric density, pattern formation. Felt production represented another significant textile innovation, utilizing the natural properties of wool fibers to create dense, water-resistant fabrics without weaving. This technique involved the controlled matting of wool fibers through combinations of moisture, heat, mechanical pressure that caused the microscopic scales on wool fibers to interlock permanently. Archaeological evidence for felt production includes specialized tools like wooden mallets and stone pressing surfaces, along with felt fragments preserved in waterlogged deposits at sites like Çatalhöyük. The processing of plant fibers underwent substantial technological advancement as communities developed sophisticated techniques for extracting, preparing, spinning fibers from flax, hemp, other plants. Flax processing required complex sequences of operations including retting, breaking, scutching, hackling. Archaeological evidence from lakeside settlements in Switzerland includes wooden tools specifically designed for each stage of flax processing, demonstrating the technical complexity of linen production. The development of specialized spinning techniques enabled the production of threads with varying characteristics suited to different textile applications. Drop spindles consisting of wooden shafts weighted with clay or stone whorls allowed spinners to create threads of consistent diameter and twist. Analysis of spindle whorls from sites like Jarmo reveals that early spinners used different whorl weights for different fiber types, with heavy whorls employed for coarse wool and lighter whorls used for fine plant fibers. The standardization of spindle whorl forms within individual sites suggests specialized production by skilled craftspeople. Animal fiber processing advanced significantly as communities developed techniques for harvesting, cleaning, preparing wool from domestic sheep and goats. The annual shearing of sheep required specialized bronze or flint-cutting tools, while the subsequent cleaning and preparation of wool involved washing, carding, sorting fibers according to quality and intended use. Archaeological evidence from pastoral sites includes bone and wooden combs designed for wool preparation, along with ceramic vessels used for washing and dyeing fibers. The beginnings of metallurgical technology during this period marked humanity's first systematic exploitation of metal resources, initially through the cold hammering of native copper and gradually advancing to smelting techniques that would revolutionize tool production. Native copper, occurring naturally in pure metallic form in certain geological contexts, provided early metalworkers with malleable material that could be shaped through hammering without requiring high-temperature processing. The Sayonu site in Turkey has yielded some of the earliest evidence for copper working with hammered copper beads, pins, small tools dating to approximately 7200 BC. The initial exploitation of native copper involved collecting surface specimens and small nuggets from copper-bearing rock formations, particularly in regions like Anatolia, the Balkans, the Great Lakes region of North America, where geological processes had concentrated pure copper deposits. Cold hammering techniques involved the systematic deformation of copper through repeated striking with stone hammers, gradually shaping the metal into desired forms while work-hardening the material to increase its strength and durability. Archaeological analysis of early copper artifacts reveals sophisticated understanding of metal properties and working techniques. Microscopic examination of hammered copper objects shows evidence of annealing, controlled heating to relieve internal stresses and restore malleability, suggesting that early metalworkers understood the relationship between heat treatment and metal properties. The transition from cold working to smelting represented a revolutionary advancement that required understanding of high-temperature chemistry and the development of specialized furnace technology. The earliest smelting experiments appear to have involved the accidental or intentional heating of copper-bearing minerals in pottery kilns or specialized furnaces, leading to the discovery that certain green and blue copper minerals could be converted into metallic copper through controlled heating and reducing atmospheres. The Belovode site in Serbia contains some of the earliest evidence for copper smelting, with furnace remains and copper slag dating to approximately 6,500 BC. These installations featured stone-lined fire chambers connected to bellows systems that provided the controlled airflow necessary for achieving and maintaining the temperatures required for copper extraction, and the furnaces were carefully designed to create reducing atmospheres that prevented copper oxidation while facilitating the separation of metallic copper from ore minerals. Tool specialization emerged as a defining characteristic of this period, reflecting both technological advancement and increasing economic complexity within Neolithic communities. The diversification of tool forms and functions demonstrates sophisticated understanding of material science, ergonomics, task-specific requirements that enabled communities to perform increasingly complex operations with greater efficiency and precision. Archaeological assemblages from sites like Tel Essawan and Çatalhöyük contain hundreds of distinct tool types, each optimized for particular functions within the expanding technological repertoire of agricultural societies. Stone tool production achieved unprecedented levels of sophistication through the development of pressure flaking techniques that allowed knappers to create extremely thin, sharp blades with precisely controlled edge geometries. These techniques involve the systematic removal of small flakes using pointed pressure tools made from antler, bone, hardwood, enabling the production of razor-sharp cutting edges and complex tool forms. The obsidian tools from Çatalhöyük demonstrate remarkable craftsmanship, with some blades measuring less than 2 millimeters in thickness, while maintaining straight, sharp edges over lengths exceeding 15 centimeters. The emergence of craft specialization within Neolithic communities represented a fundamental shift in economic organization that enabled unprecedented levels of technological innovation and artistic achievement. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites demonstrates the presence of individuals who devoted substantial portions of their time to specific craft activities, developing specialized skills and producing goods that exceeded the capabilities of household-level production. These specialists created products that were traded across considerable distances, establishing economic networks that connected communities across hundreds of kilometers. Pottery specialists developed techniques and artistic styles that distinguished their work from household pottery production, creating vessels with exceptional technical quality and decorative sophistication. The ceramics from specialized workshops at sites like Dabagia display consistent technical standards, standardized forms, complex decorative schemes that suggest production by individuals with extensive training and experience. These specialists appear to have controlled access to high-quality clay sources, specialized firing facilities, rare pigments used for decorative applications. Textile specialists working alongside pottery craftspeople established production centers that served as catalysts for the most dramatic transformation in human settlement patterns since the adoption of agriculture itself. The accumulated technological innovations of the preceding millennia, sophisticated ceramic production, advanced textile manufacturing, early metallurgy, specialized tool production, created the foundation for unprecedented concentrations of human population and the emergence of complex urban centers that would redefine the relationship between individuals, communities, the landscape. Çatalhöyük in central Anatolia stands as the most remarkable example of early urban development, representing a quantum leap in settlement size, social complexity, architectural sophistication. Occupied continuously from approximately 7500 to 6400 BC, this site supported a population estimated between 3,000 and 8,000 individuals at its peak, making it one of the largest human settlements in existence at that time. The site's 13 hectares contain densely packed rectangular houses constructed using standardized mud brick techniques, with structures built directly against one another to create a honeycomb-like urban fabric that maximized land use efficiency while providing structural stability. The architectural organization of Çatalhöyük reflected entirely new approaches to urban planning and community organization. Unlike earlier settlements where houses were typically arranged around central courtyards or plazas, Çatalhöyük featured a continuous building mass with no ground-level streets or pathways. Residents accessed their homes through roof openings connected by wooden ladders, creating a three-dimensional circulation system that utilized rooftops as the primary pedestrian network. This unusual arrangement provided several practical advantages. It maximized usable interior space, created defensive advantages by eliminating easily accessible entrances, facilitated waste management through the disposal of refuse into abandoned rooms that were subsequently filled and built over. Individual houses at Çatalhöyük displayed remarkable standardization in size and internal organization, typically measuring 4x5 meters and featuring consistent arrangements of hearths, storage areas, sleeping platforms. The main living areas contained raised platforms along the walls that served multiple functions as seating, sleeping areas, work surfaces. These platforms were constructed using carefully laid mud brick foundations covered with lime plaster that was renewed regularly, creating smooth, clean surfaces suitable for domestic activities. Beneath these platforms, residents buried their dead in flexed positions wrapped in textiles and accompanied by personal possessions including obsidian tools, bone ornaments, ceramic vessels. The interior walls of houses featured elaborate decorative schemes that combined painted plaster, relief sculptures, carefully arranged animal skulls and horns. Wall paintings depicted complex scenes including geometric patterns, human figures, animals, what appeared to be landscape views of the surrounding volcanic terrain. The famous hunting scene murals show groups of human figures surrounding large animals, possibly aurochs or deer, rendered in sophisticated compositions that demonstrate advanced artistic capabilities. Three-dimensional wall reliefs featured leopards, bears, vultures modeled in clay and painted with mineral pigments, creating dramatic focal points within domestic spaces. The concentration of specialized craft production at Çatalhöyük reached levels unprecedented in earlier settlements, with archaeological evidence indicating the presence of full-time specialists producing goods for both local consumption and long-distance trade. Obsidian tool production represented the site's most significant industry, utilizing volcanic glass from nearby sources at Hasandağ and Gölüdağ volcanoes. The quality of Çatalhöyük obsidian tools was exceptional, with pressure-flaked blades achieving sharpness comparable to modern surgical instruments while maintaining durability superior to contemporary flint implements. The obsidian workshops at Çatalhöyük contained specialized toolkits including pressure flakers made from carefully shaped antler tines, stone anvils for supporting workpieces, leather pads for protecting hands during knapping operations. Analysis of production debris reveals highly systematic reduction sequences designed to maximize blade production from individual obsidian cores while minimizing waste. The most skilled knappers could produce over 100 usable blades from a single large core, representing remarkable efficiency in raw material utilization. Textile production at Çatalhöyük achieved extraordinary sophistication, with preserved fabric fragments demonstrating complex weaving techniques and sophisticated dyeing methods. The site's inhabitants produced textiles using both wool from domestic sheep and plant fibers from wild and cultivated sources. Microscopic analysis of textile remains reveals the use of multiple fiber types within individual fabrics, creating materials with varying properties suited to different applications. Some textiles display evidence of complex pattern weaving using multiple colors, suggesting the use of sophisticated loom technologies and advanced planning of decorative schemes. The social organization necessary to coordinate such complex craft production and maintain urban infrastructure required new forms of leadership and decision-making processes. Archaeological evidence suggests the emergence of social hierarchies based on craft specialization, trade relationships, possibly ritual authority. Some houses at Çatalhöyük contained significantly more elaborate decorative schemes, larger storage facilities, greater quantities of exotic goods, indicating differential access to resources and status markers. However, the overall similarity in house sizes and basic architectural features suggests that social stratification remained relatively limited compared to later urban societies. The defensive architecture that emerged during this period represented responses to increasing competition for resources and territory as population densities rose and agricultural land became more valuable. The massive stone walls and towers at pre-pottery Neolithic Jericho, constructed around 8000 BC, established architectural precedents that would be followed at numerous sites across the Fertile Crescent and beyond. These fortifications required coordinated labor involving hundreds of individuals working over multiple construction seasons, demonstrating the ability of early urban communities to organize large-scale collective projects. The Jericho wall system consisted of stone foundations supporting mud brick superstructures that stood approximately 4 meters high and extended for over 600 meters around the settlement's perimeter. The wall incorporated several towers, including the famous circular tower that still stands 8.5 meters high, containing an internal stone staircase providing access to the top. The construction techniques employed at Jericho involved quarrying large limestone blocks from nearby sources, transporting them to the construction site using wooden levers and rollers, fitting them together using careful, dry stone masonry techniques. Similar defensive systems appeared at sites across the Levant and Anatolia during the 7th and 6th millennia BC, indicating widespread concerns about security and territorial control. Tel Es-Sarwan in Iraq featured a defensive wall constructed around 6500 BC using mud brick techniques, similar to those employed in domestic architecture, but on a much larger scale. The wall incorporated bastions and gates designed to control access to the settlement, while providing defensive positions for archers and other defenders. Archaeological evidence suggests that these fortifications were maintained and rebuilt multiple times, indicating their continued importance for community security. The development of defensive architecture coincided with changes in settlement location preferences, with many communities choosing elevated positions that provided natural defensive advantages while maintaining access to agricultural land and water sources. Tel Halaf in Syria occupied a strategic position on a low hill overlooking the Kabur River Valley, providing excellent visibility of surrounding terrain while remaining accessible to fertile agricultural soils. The site's inhabitants constructed terraced defensive works that incorporated natural topographic features while adding artificial barriers where needed. Defensive considerations also influenced house construction techniques, with many settlements featuring houses built with thick walls, limited ground-level openings, flat roofs that could serve as defensive platforms. At Bukra in Syria, houses were constructed with walls exceeding 1 meter in thickness, far beyond structural requirements for normal domestic use. These walls contained internal chambers and passages that could provide secure storage for valuable goods while offering protected areas during conflicts. The rooftop access systems, typical of many sites during this period, served dual purposes as circulation routes and defensive positions. The evolution of house forms during this period reflected both practical improvements in construction techniques and changing social requirements as communities grew larger and more complex. The transition from circular to rectangular house plans represented a fundamental shift in architectural thinking that would influence building design for millennia to come. Rectangular structures offered several advantages over circular forms. They could be more easily expanded through the addition of new rooms. They made more efficient use of available space. They could be joined together to create continuous building masses. The earliest rectangular houses appeared around 7500 BC at sites like Sayonu in Turkey, where builders developed sophisticated techniques for constructing large multi-room structures using stone foundations and mud brick walls. These buildings featured internal subdivisions that created specialized areas for different activities, including food preparation, craft production, storage, sleeping. The room arrangements followed consistent patterns across different houses, suggesting the development of standardized architectural conventions that balanced functional requirements with cultural preferences. Storage facilities underwent dramatic expansion and technological improvement as communities needed to manage increasingly large agricultural surpluses and craft production inventories. The development of large ceramic storage vessels capable of containing hundreds of liters represented one solution to storage challenges, but communities also constructed specialized storage buildings and underground facilities designed to protect valuable goods from theft, fire, environmental damage. At Tel Es-Sowan, archaeologists have identified storage buildings containing dozens of large ceramic jars arranged in systematic patterns that facilitated inventory management and access control. Underground storage facilities became increasingly sophisticated, with some sites featuring elaborate systems of interconnected chambers carved into bedrock or constructed using stone masonry techniques. These installations provided secure, climate-controlled environments ideal for preserving grain, textiles, other perishable goods over extended periods. The Sha'ar HaGolan site in Israel contains underground storage chambers with plastered walls and carefully fitted stone covers that created nearly airtight seals protecting contents from moisture and pests. The technological innovations in storage extended to the development of specialized containers and preservation techniques that maximize the utility of stored goods. Large ceramic pithoi, some exceeding 2 meters in height, were designed with narrow necks that could be sealed with clay stoppers or organic covers. These vessels were often partially buried in floors or courtyards to provide additional temperature stability while remaining accessible for regular use. The interior surfaces were sometimes lined with bitumen or other waterproof materials to prevent moisture penetration and contamination. Trade networks during this period achieved unprecedented geographical scope and organizational complexity, connecting communities across thousands of kilometers through systematic exchange relationships that moved both utilitarian goods and luxury items. The obsidian trade represents the most thoroughly documented of these networks, with volcanic glass from Anatolian sources reaching sites throughout the Levant, Mesopotamia, beyond. Chemical analysis of obsidian artifacts allows archaeologists to trace specific pieces back to their geological sources. revealing the routes and mechanisms through which these materials moved across the landscape. The Kiftlik obsidian source in central Anatolia supplied communities across a radius of over 1,000 kilometers, with finished tools and raw materials reaching sites in Syria, Iraq, the Levant, through complex distribution networks. The consistency of tool forms and production techniques across this vast area suggests the existence of specialized trading partnerships and possibly itinerant craftspeople who maintain technical standards while adapting to local preferences and requirements. Some sites contain obsidian tool production areas with debris patterns indicating the presence of visiting specialists who produce tools using imported raw materials. Jade and other precious stone materials moved through similar long-distance networks, with sources in Central Asia supplying communities across Europe and the Near East. The Varna culture of Bulgaria, flourishing around 5500 BC, produced some of the world's earliest elaborate gold ornaments, while maintaining trade connections that brought jade, copper, other exotic materials from sources hundreds of kilometers away. The technical sophistication of Varna metalwork, including complex gold diadems and ceremonial axes, demonstrates advanced understanding of metallurgical techniques and artistic design principles. But what drives trade on this scale? It's not just economics, it's also social prestige, political alliance, ritual obligation. The organization of these trade networks required sophisticated social institutions capable of maintaining relationships across cultural and linguistic boundaries while ensuring the reliable flow of goods over long distances and extended time periods. Archaeological evidence suggests the development of standardized exchange rates, quality control mechanisms, dispute resolution procedures that enabled trade relationships to persist despite the challenges of prehistoric communication and transportation systems. The emergence of specialized trading communities represented another significant development, with some settlements appearing to focus primarily on the production and exchange of particular goods rather than subsistence agriculture. The spondylus shell trade, which moved marine shells from the Mediterranean and Black Sea coasts to inland communities across Europe, appears to have been controlled by specialized trading groups who maintain processing centers and distribution networks spanning the continent. These shells were converted into ornaments, ritual objects, status symbols that played important roles in the social and religious life of early agricultural communities. The extensive trade networks and specialized craft production centers that had emerged by 6000 BC created unprecedented opportunities for individuals and groups to accumulate wealth, control resources, exercise influence over their communities. This period witnessed the crystallization of social hierarchies that had been developing gradually during preceding millennia, manifesting most clearly through increasingly elaborate burial practices that reflected differential access to material goods, exotic objects, specialized services. The archaeological record from this era reveals stark contrast between simple interments containing few or no grave goods and spectacular burials accompanied by hundreds of precious objects, indicating the emergence of distinct social classes with vastly different levels of wealth and status. The Varna cemetery in Bulgaria, dating to approximately 4600–4200 BC, provides the most dramatic evidence for early social stratification in the archaeological record. Grave 43, containing the remains of a middle-aged male, included over 990 gold objects with a combined weight exceeding 1.5 kilograms, more gold than had been discovered in all other contemporary sites combined. The burial assemblage featured a massive gold diadem, gold-handled stone axes, gold-sheathed wooden staffs, hundreds of gold appliques that had been sewn onto clothing or burial shrouds. The technical sophistication of these objects demonstrates advanced metallurgical skills, including techniques for creating thin gold sheet, complex repoussé decoration, precise soldering of multiple components. The contrast between elite burials like Varna 43 and contemporary simple graves within the same cemetery reveals the extent of social differentiation that had developed by the 5th millennium BC. While wealthy individuals were interred with elaborate gold ornaments, copper tools, imported spondylus shell ornaments, fine ceramic vessels, the majority of burials contained only basic pottery vessels and simple stone tools. Some graves contained no artifacts whatsoever, suggesting the presence of individuals who lacked access to material wealth or whose social status did not warrant elaborate mortuary treatment. This pattern of differential burial treatment appears across multiple sites throughout southeastern Europe, indicating widespread acceptance of social hierarchies based on wealth accumulation and status differentiation. The Tisa culture of Hungary and Serbia developed similar patterns of elite burial during this same period, with wealthy individuals interred in elaborate graves containing copper axes, gold ornaments, imported exotic materials. The Tisa cemetery revealed burials with copper shaft hole axes weighing over 2 kilograms, representing substantial investments in both raw materials and skilled craftsmanship. These axes required sophisticated casting techniques involving two-piece molds and precise temperature control to achieve the complex internal geometries necessary for hafting. The presence of such objects in graves indicates their primary function as status symbols rather than utilitarian tools, as their weight and decoration made them impractical for actual use. CTA Conclusion. So what does all of this mean for us today? Everything. Every single aspect of modern civilization, our cities, our governments, our technology, our social structures, has its roots in the Neolithic Revolution. The agricultural surplus that enables some people to be scientists, artists, engineers, teachers, that comes from the Neolithic. The concept of property, of land ownership, of inheritance, Neolithic. The existence of social classes, of wealth inequality, of political hierarchies, all Neolithic innovations for better and worse. Understanding the Neolithic isn't just about understanding the past. It's about understanding ourselves, because the challenges those early farmers faced, how to manage resources sustainably, how to organize complex societies fairly, how to balance individual interests with collective needs, those are still our challenges today. We're still living in the world the Neolithic Revolution created. And if we want to navigate the challenges of the 21st century successfully, we need to understand how we got here. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most transformative periods in human history. If you found this fascinating, make sure to subscribe to Flow of History and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the forces that shaped our world. What aspect of the Neolithic Revolution surprised you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone and love hearing your perspectives. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding who we are and who we might become.